When a millionaire paid a homeless woman to carry his child, the world called it eccentric, but he called it freedom from emotional entanglements. No love. No mother. Just a contract. But when that baby was born, he stared into its eyes and froze, because he recognized something no DNA test could explain. Now he's racing against time, trying to uncover a past he thought was buried. Who really is this child, and what did he just bring into the world? A rain-slicked Bentley sat idling outside a soup kitchen in downtown Los Angeles, steam rising off its polished hood as if even the metal could sense the tension of the moment. Inside the car, Bernard Cavendish, a man whose name conjured skyscrapers and silent auctions, stared through the tinted window at a woman curled against the cold brick wall. Her coat was shredded at the seams. Her hair stuck to her cheek in wet strands. Her eyes were closed, but her hands clutched a faded photograph as if it were her last possession. Bernard had researched her for months. Rebecca Lane, 32, formerly a nurse, unhoused for 4 years, no known family, drug tests clean for 2. She was, in his mind, perfect. And he was here to offer her something obscene. The door clicked open and he stepped into the rain, his bespoke shoes sloshing into puddles like they belonged there. She opened one eye lazily, expecting to be told to move along. Instead, he knelt beside her and spoke with the eerie calm of a man used to getting what he wanted. He said he would pay her $2 million. $1 million now. $1 million after. No romance. No relationship. Just a child. She blinked as if slapped. Then she laughed, the sound dry and frayed. But he wasn't joking. In his briefcase was a contract drafted by the most feared legal team on the West Coast. It guaranteed medical care, private housing, psychological support. The only clause that mattered, the baby would be his and his alone. Rebecca asked one question. Why me? His answer was chillingly simple. Because you have nothing to lose. Days later, she was in a luxury penthouse, disoriented by the quiet and the clean linen smell, trying to remember how to eat with a fork again. She saw a doctor. She took the pills. She followed the rules. Each day, she whispered to herself that this wasn't motherhood, it was survival. But late at night, she'd touch her belly and cry, not because she was sad, but because for the first time in years, she felt wanted. Bernard didn't visit. His lawyers did. Psychologists did. Nutritionists did. But not him. To him, she was a means to an end, a vessel with a pulse. And to her, he was the devil wearing Tom Ford. But money has a way of softening jagged truths. So she kept going. By month 5, the child moved. And that night, she dreamed of a girl with golden curls standing in a burning room, asking for someone named Charlie. She woke up screaming. Alone. Meanwhile, Bernard watched from afar, tracking every heartbeat of the fetus from a private clinic's encrypted app. His friends called him mad. His mother had disowned him when he'd told her the plan. He didn't care. He didn't want love or marriage or the legal mess of adoption. He wanted an heir without emotional clutter. But beneath his cold logic lay something darker, an absence that money hadn't filled, an event in his youth that left a permanent fracture in his soul. He believed a child might seal that crack shut. Or at least bury it. But he never asked if the crack was meant to be healed. On the final day of the 8th month, he stood before the empty nursery, white, sterile, symmetrical. There were no toys. No photos. No warmth. It looked like a science lab built by a grieving god. He muttered, soon. And somewhere across town, Rebecca rubbed her belly and whispered, not soon enough. Rebecca didn't touch the million for weeks. It sat in a discreet black card inside her dresser, taunting her like a secret she wasn't brave enough to spend. Instead, she clung to routines, a morning smoothie ordered by the nutritionist, prenatal yoga streamed on an oversized TV she rarely looked at, silent evenings by the window counting the lights flickering across a city that never blinked. Yet in the stillness, the past leaked in like cold air through cracked glass. She wasn't always broken. She hadn't always lived beneath bridges or inside shelters where names disappeared faster than food. Years ago, she'd worn scrubs and comforted strangers with warm hands. Pediatric trauma was her specialty. She was good at it. Until the day she wasn't. The day the monitors flatlined and a small boy named Charlie, Yes, Charlie, slipped through her fingers like smoke. He'd been 7. A car crash. DOA, but she'd tried. She had held his hand even after they called the time. But it wasn't the boy's death that destroyed her. It was the fallout. A lawsuit. A whisper campaign. A single syringe found slightly mislabeled. She'd never touched it. She swore. But the hospital washed its hands of her, and the press painted her as careless. The investigation cleared her legally, but the damage was done. Nobody wants a nurse with a headline. She spiraled, not with drugs, not with violence, but with shame. Her license was suspended. Her reputation dissolved. She drank. She disappeared. By the time she resurfaced, the world had moved on, and she was just another woman talking to ghosts. She often dreamed of Charlie, not the real boy, but a version conjured by guilt, older now, asking her why she let go. So when Bernard offered her the chance to carry life instead of watching it slip away, she didn't hesitate. She pretended it was just a transaction, a job, an experiment in human resilience. But deep inside, something ached to be forgiven. Pregnancy changed her. Not just physically, the hormones, the swelling, the strange glow, but spiritually. It was as if the child inside her rewrote the architecture of her soul. She began painting again. She sang old lullabies when no one was listening. She touched her belly like it was sacred, even when the contract told her not to get attached. But attachment had a way of sneaking in through the back door. Around her, the apartment grew warmer. She bought a plant. It died. She cried anyway. Then replaced it. One evening, while flipping through her old journal, salvaged from a trash bag before she lost everything, she stumbled across a passage dated a year before she met Bernard. It read, "If I ever get another chance to care for a child, I won't let the world take it from me." She stared at the ink, her hands trembling. She hadn't remembered writing it. Had she known, somehow? Had life looped back around to offer her a cruel second shot? Her therapist, part of Bernard's contractual care package, told her not to project. But what did he know about ghosts that came in the shape of regret? As the due date approached, Rebecca found herself recoiling from the staff assigned to her. She didn't trust the smiles, the forced kindness. She could feel the transaction in every word, every touch. She wasn't a mother to them. She was inventory. She thought about running. Not for freedom, but for clarity. But where would she go? Her womb was rented. Her life leased. And then came the dream again, this time, clearer. The girl with golden curls. The burning room. Only this time, she wasn't alone. A man stood beside the girl. His face was hidden in shadow, but his voice echoed like thunder. "You owe me this." Rebecca woke gasping, clutching her stomach, her breath coming in short bursts like her lungs didn't believe in reality anymore. Something was coming. She could feel it in her bones. Not just labor. Not just pain. But something spiritual. Something cosmic. She began reading about reincarnation, quantum memory, ancestral trauma. Ridiculous, maybe. But the more she read, the more the dots connected in terrifying ways. Was this just biology, or prophecy? When she tried to talk to Bernard's head doctor about it, he dismissed her as emotionally sensitive due to late-term stress. But Rebecca knew that tone. It was the same one she'd used with dying children when they asked if they'd see their parents again. Reassuring, soft, and completely false. So she shut up. She watched. She waited. And as the final week approached, she started writing letters. One to the child. One to herself. One to Charlie. She sealed them in a showbox under her bed, unsure if anyone would ever read them. But the words helped. They made her feel real again. Not a pawn. Not a contract. A person. A woman. A mother. The night before her scheduled C-section, she walked out to the rooftop of the penthouse and stared at the stars, whispering promises to a sky that offered no answers. Somewhere, far below, Bernard Cavendish sat in his study, sipping an aged whiskey, staring at the contract he'd created, completely unaware that nothing written on paper could prepare him for what was about to arrive. The hospital suite was a pristine cocoon of marble floors, silent nurses, and the faint scent of lavender piped through hidden vents, sterile luxury designed to make miracles feel expensive. Bernard arrived in a tailored black suit, as if attending a gala rather than the birth of his child. He didn't speak to Rebecca when he entered. He barely looked at her. Instead, he fixed his gaze on the vitals monitor and nodded at the team of specialists he'd assembled, each one briefed and rehearsed like players in a Broadway show. Rebecca, drenched in sweat, trembling with contractions, looked like she didn't belong in the scene, a character from another film spliced into a performance she didn't audition for. She gripped the bedrail and breathed through her pain, trying to pretend it was just a role she was playing. But it wasn't. It was raw, real, and consuming. When the final push came, the room tensed like a wire. One of the nurses whispered something into her mic, and Bernard stepped forward slightly, his eyes locked on the space between agony and arrival. Then the child emerged. A girl. The room exhaled. But Bernard did not move. The nurse swaddled the newborn, wrapped her in a cashmere blanket monogrammed with the initials BC, and turned toward him with a practiced smile. "Congratulations, sir." And that's when it happened. Bernard took one look at the baby's face and staggered back a step, as if struck. The nurse flinched. Rebecca, through the haze of exhaustion, noticed it, his pupils dilating, the twitch at the corner of his mouth, the way his breath caught. The room went still. He didn't speak. Didn't reach. Didn't ask to hold her. Just stared. "Is something wrong?" Rebecca asked, her voice barely more than a rasp. Bernard didn't answer. He simply turned to his assistant and muttered, "Get the doctor. Now." Minutes later, the head neonatologist arrived and began a full diagnostic, despite the child's perfect APGAR score. No deformities. No complications. Nothing medically unusual. But Bernard remained frozen, eyes glued to the child's face like it was a puzzle made of mirrors. The doctor gently asked what the concern was, and Bernard pointed to the baby's eyes. "They're hazel," he said flatly. "Like my brother's." Everyone exchanged confused glances. Rebecca frowned. "You never mentioned a brother." Bernard didn't respond. Instead, he walked out of the room. Not hurried. Not frantic. Just gone. The staff carried on, confused but too well paid to question. Rebecca was handed the baby, and despite the contract, no one moved to take her away. She held the child to her chest and felt something ancient ignite inside her, something not even money could broker. Hours passed before Bernard returned, this time with a folder in his hand. He requested a private moment with Rebecca. She agreed, reluctantly. He closed the door and paced like a caged animal before turning to her with a face she didn't recognize. Pale, desperate, haunted. "She looks exactly like someone I lost," he said. "Not just the eyes. The nose. The shape of her mouth. Even the birthmark." Rebecca blinked. "Birthmark?" He nodded and showed her a photo, an old one, sun-bleached and frayed. A young boy and a girl, maybe 6 years old, standing in front of a lake. The girl had a tiny crescent-shaped mark on her neck. Bernard whispered, "My sister. She drowned when I was 12. Body was never found." Rebecca's stomach twisted. "You think this baby is her?" Bernard didn't answer directly. He simply said, "I don't believe in coincidences." Rebecca stared at him, her mind struggling to balance grief, science, and superstition. "That's impossible." Bernard shook his head. "I built my life on the impossible." He left again, this time instructing his legal team to pause the contract's custody clause. He needed time, space, answers. The baby remained with Rebecca. No one dared challenge the decision. She named her Lila, whispering it over and over until it no longer felt like trespassing. But in the quiet moments, when Lila stared up at her with those strange hazel eyes, Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that she was looking at something, or someone, older than time. One night, while singing softly to the child, Lila turned her head toward Rebecca and cooed. Her tiny hand brushed against her mother's cheek, and Rebecca froze. That coo, it wasn't just sound. It felt familiar. The same tone Charlie used when he used to laugh through his oxygen mask. She felt it in her bones. Her gut. Her blood. Bernard wasn't the only one haunted by echoes. This child, this impossible girl, was unearthing pieces of the past neither of them were prepared to face. The next morning, Bernard sent a single message to Rebecca's secure phone. It read, "She's not just ours. She's a message." And then, as if the universe itself had sensed the gravity of the birth, the clouds broke and a hard, cold rain fell across the city. Cleansing, warning, mourning something that was never meant to return. Bernard had built empires from shadows, tech startups that sold invisibility, security firms that knew your secrets before you did, intelligence networks that whispered through encrypted channels no one could trace. So when he decided to investigate the child that had upended his existence, he didn't just make a few calls, he launched an operation. He recruited geneticists from Zurich, hired spiritual consultants from Varanasi, and secured private investigators who specialized in the metaphysical. If it existed, if it breathed, if it remembered, Bernard would find it. The first step was science. He ordered a full genome sequencing of Lila, comparing it against every known Cavendish relative, past and present. The results returned something unexpected. Not a mismatch, but an anomaly. Lila's DNA was clean. Too clean. No mutations, no junk code, no ancestral markers of disease or trauma. It was as if she'd been scrubbed by nature itself. "She's pristine," the lead geneticist whispered. "Almost like a reset." That word stuck to Bernard like sap. Reset. As if Lila were a do-over, a second draft of something the world had erased. He dove deeper, requesting a forensic reconstruction of his sister's DNA, using old hairbrush samples stored in his family's estate vault. The lab matched several mitochondrial strands. Nothing definitive, but enough to make his heart thunder. The past was rising, like a tide that ignored the laws of time. But science wasn't enough. Not when Rebecca reported that Lila refused to sleep in silence. She needed the hum of a song, specifically "You Are My Sunshine," a tune Bernard's sister used to sing on stormy nights. Rebecca didn't know this. No one did. Bernard hadn't spoken it aloud in decades. He watched video footage of Lila in the nursery, clutching a plush fox to her chest, staring directly at the camera with eyes that didn't blink, as if she were trying to remember how to forget. He felt the same way. At night, Bernard started dreaming of lakes, cold, black water stretching out forever, and a girl standing just beneath the surface, her lips moving but no sound escaping. He began to question not just his reality, but the nature of memory itself. Was it possible that grief had bent time? That loss had carved a loophole into the universe and sent back an echo wrapped in flesh and innocence? He turned to quantum theory, brought in a physicist who specialized in consciousness and reincarnation. The man listened politely, then said, "If time is not linear, then yes, some souls might return." Bernard didn't laugh. He simply nodded and poured another drink. Meanwhile, his investigators uncovered more about Rebecca. They discovered a sealed record from the hospital where Charlie had died. There was a note, one that never made it to court. The boy had whispered a name as he slipped away. Lila. The nurse on duty had jotted it down, unsure if it meant anything. Rebecca never saw the note. It was buried in bureaucracy. But Bernard saw it now. And it shook him. Lila was more than a child. She was a convergence, a crossroads where every buried truth clawed its way into the light. He flew to the hospital, demanded access to archives, and watched a grainy CCTV video of the day Charlie passed. There was no audio. Just images. But in the moment of death, Charlie's eyes widened, and for a split second, his gaze shifted, upward, past the ceiling, toward something unseen. Bernard recognized the expression. It was the same look Lila had when she first saw him. That startled knowing. That impossible grief. He began spiraling, his days consumed by footage, his nights by dreams. He stopped taking calls. Missed board meetings. Sold off shares. The world thought he was preparing for early retirement. But he was unraveling. He set up cameras in Lila's room, not out of paranoia, but reverence. He recorded every blink, every breath, hoping for a sign. And he got one. One morning, Rebecca found Lila holding the photograph Bernard had shown her, the one of his sister by the lake. No one had given it to the child. It had been stored in a drawer, locked, out of sight. Lila was cooing at it, babbling nonsense that sounded eerily like Bernie. That had been his sister's nickname for him. He fell to his knees. Not out of fear, but awe. Something divine, or demonic, was at play. The final straw came when Bernard visited the lake himself, the same one where his sister vanished. He hadn't returned in decades. He walked the shore, the wind howling through the trees like a choir of forgotten voices. And then he saw it. Carved into the bark of an old oak, nearly faded but still legible, Lila was here. The carving was dated 2 years before the birth of the child. Bernard didn't cry. He laughed. A raw, painful sound that echoed through the trees and scared away the birds. He realized then that some truths don't fit into contracts. Some answers don't come in briefcases. And some children aren't born, they return. He walked back to the car, called Rebecca, and said only 2 words, "I believe." The revelation didn't arrive like a lightning bolt. It crept in, slow and cruel, like a fog that waits until you're halfway lost before you realize you can't see the road anymore. Bernard had returned from the lake hollowed out, walking through his mansion like a ghost dragging its memories behind it. He kept his distance from Lila for days, fearing that proximity might shatter the fragile wall separating belief from delusion. But then came a phone call from the archivist at the hospital where Charlie had died. "There's something you need to see," the voice said. No preamble. No small talk. Just urgency, crackling through the receiver like electricity. Bernard arrived within the hour, escorted into a cold, windowless records room where the archivist handed him a weathered manila envelope. Inside were transcripts, photographs, and a sealed letter that had never been opened, marked with Rebecca's name. It was written by Charlie's biological mother, a woman who had given him up for adoption after birth but had sent one final letter to the hospital when she heard about the accident. Her name was Eleanor Cavendish. Bernard's mother. The ink ran like tears down the page, describing a child born out of wedlock during a scandalous affair she had buried to protect the Cavendish name. The child had been sent to another state, adopted quietly, record sealed. Bernard had never known. He'd been told he was an only child, that his mother had 1 miscarriage and no other children. But here, laid out in his hands, was proof that Charlie, Rebecca's Charlie, had been his half-brother. The weight of it nearly knocked him to the ground. He'd funded this pregnancy to create an heir, a legacy, a perfect future detached from pain. And in doing so, he'd inadvertently summoned the past, through blood, through grief, through Rebecca. His silence cracked into a scream in that dim archive, a howl of grief so feral the staff thought someone had died. And in a way, someone had. The version of Bernard who believed he controlled fate, who thought money could insulate him from the cosmic cruelty of time, was gone. That night, he drove to Rebecca's apartment. She opened the door cautiously, Lila perched on her hip, blinking with sleepy confusion. Bernard didn't speak. He simply handed her the letter. She read it slowly, eyes wide, mouth parting in disbelief. "Charlie was your brother," she whispered. Bernard nodded. Then added, "And Lila is his niece. And maybe something more." Rebecca staggered back, clutching the doorway like it was the only real thing in the room. She looked at Lila, then back at Bernard, and asked the question neither of them had dared say aloud. "Do you think she came back for him?" Bernard didn't answer. Because the question wasn't absurd anymore. It felt more like the only explanation left standing. Over the following weeks, Bernard and Rebecca became co-conspirators in a mystery too fragile to name. They combed through medical journals and spiritual texts, discussed reincarnation over coffee, and listened for signs in Lila's babble that sounded like memories with blurred edges. Rebecca confessed something she had never told another soul, that on the night Charlie died, she had prayed, not to save him, but to keep him. She had begged the universe to let her try again. To make it right. And now, here she was, mother to a girl who laughed like Charlie, who smiled with a tilt he used to make when trying to steal cookies from the nurse's station. Bernard, once a man who built walls from contracts, now tore them down one gesture at a time. He held Lila. He sang to her. Not as an owner. Not as a creator. But as someone asking forgiveness for sins he hadn't even known he'd committed. One morning, while changing Lila's clothes, Bernard noticed a new mark on her skin, a faint birthmark in the shape of a lily, blooming over her ribcage. It hadn't been there before. Rebecca saw it too, and without saying a word, began to cry. They knew, without knowing how, that the mark wasn't random. It was a message. A signature. A confirmation. But it also brought fear. Because if Lila had returned from somewhere, could she leave again? Could she be taken? That night, Bernard drafted a new contract, not for custody, not for ownership, but for guardianship, pledging everything he had to the child, not as payment, but as penance. And when Rebecca signed it, it felt more like a vow than a legal document. The revelation had bound them, not by law, but by shared awe. The world remained oblivious, chalking Bernard's public withdrawal up to eccentricity, his fortune to boredom, his sudden philanthropy to guilt. But behind closed doors, in the stillness of a nursery that now breathed with warmth, two souls watched over a third, knowing she wasn't just a child. She was the echo of a broken promise, returned to be fulfilled. The sun broke over the city like a reluctant apology, casting pale gold across Bernard's study where silence had once signaled solitude, but now trembled with responsibility. Lila slept in the crook of Rebecca's arm on the couch nearby, her breath steady, small fingers curled into a fist that seemed ready to hold the future. Bernard stood at the window, holding the final envelope, one his lawyers had urged him not to open. Inside was a court document, pre-filed, stating his legal right to claim sole custody. It was the original plan. The contract allowed it. The wealth he'd amassed could buy any judge, any ruling, any fate. But now, the paper felt toxic in his hands. A relic of a man who believed ownership was the same as love. He lit a match and watched the contract curl and blacken in a glass bowl, its ash spiraling upward like a soul finally released. When the last edge disappeared, Bernard turned to Rebecca and said, "She's not mine. She's ours. But more than that, she's her own." Rebecca nodded, tears thick in her eyes but unshed, because even after all this time, there was more storm to weather. The media, already restless from Bernard's disappearance from public life, began circling like vultures. A leaked hospital photo, a blurry image of Lila cradled in Bernard's arms outside a pediatric appointment, sent the tabloids into a frenzy. "Reclusive tycoon and secret child," the headline screamed. Calls poured in. Reporters camped outside both their homes. Conspiracy theorists spun wild tales about cloning, reincarnation, even divine prophecy. Bernard ignored them, but the noise grew louder each day. Then came the call from his mother. The first in years. Her voice, once a fortress of judgment, now cracked with something he hadn't heard since childhood: fear. "Is it true?" she asked. "Is it really her?" Bernard said nothing. She continued, "If the past is clawing back into this family, you have to bury it again." That sentence lit something in Bernard, not rage, but resolve. "No," he replied calmly. "This time, I'm going to face it." He cut ties with the board of Cavendish Global, transferring majority shares to a new trust in Lila's name, with Rebecca as guardian. The business world erupted. Accusations of mental decline. Power plays. Betrayal. But Bernard smiled through it, because for the first time in his life, he wasn't protecting a fortune, he was protecting a future. Together, they moved into a quiet home outside the city, where the nights were filled with cricket song instead of sirens. Bernard built a garden with his own hands, planted lilies and sunflowers side by side, told Lila stories as she toddled between rows of green, chasing butterflies like fragments of memory trying to take shape. But even peace has its shadows. One night, Lila woke screaming. Rebecca ran to her side, found her shaking, eyes wide, pointing to the corner of the room where no one stood. "He was there," she sobbed. "Charlie." The name hit Rebecca like a brick to the chest. Bernard came running, heart racing. They held her until she calmed, the three of them wrapped in an embrace born not of obligation, but something deeper, recognition. That night, Rebecca pulled out the letters she had once written and read them aloud. To Charlie. To herself. To the universe. Bernard listened without interruption, each word a stitch in the wound they shared. And when she finished, Lila reached out, touched her mother's face, and whispered, "Thank you for finding me." The next morning, Rebecca found Bernard outside by the garden, hands dirted, eyes distant. "What if she's not meant to stay?" he asked. Rebecca crouched beside him, took his hands in hers. Then we make every second matter until she has to go. Time passed. Lila grew, and with her grew the whispers, strange wisdom in her speech, a kindness that felt too old for her age, a knowing glance that passed between them in moments too perfect to be coincidence. They never told her the full truth, not yet. But they didn't need to. She carried it in her laugh, in the way she calmed Bernard's nightmares with a single touch, in how she looked at Rebecca with a gaze that said, "You did not fail." In the final scene, Bernard stood at the edge of the lake where his sister had vanished, now holding Lila's hand. She dropped a lily into the water and said, "For the girl who had to wait." Bernard closed his eyes. The ripples shimmered outward, carrying memory, grief, and gratitude all at once. And though no voices answered from the depths, he felt, no, he knew, something had finally come full circle. Not fixed. Not forgotten. But forgiven.